If you're looking for a video comparing Fluent Bit and the OpenTelemetry Collector, then this episode is for you. Welcome back to the Is It Observable YouTube channel. Today's episode is going to be part of the OpenTelemetry series. If you pay attention, the community has built a tremendous effort to provide us an open standard for observability called OpenTelemetry. OpenTelemetry includes the collector and many open instrumentation libraries. As you may all know, the collector is able to process metrics, traces, and logs. But when it comes to logs, the market had relied for many years on the Fluent ecosystem. That includes Fluent D and its little brother, Fluent Bit. With the recent updates done by Fluent Bit supporting not only logs, but also metrics and traces, we can ask yourself, what agent should I use? So then this episode is designed to guide you on which agent you would make more sense for you and specifically in your environment. If you enjoyed today's content, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. So let's see what you're going to learn out of this episode. We'll start by looking on the feature relating on the design of our pipeline. Then we'll cover specifically logs, so feature for logs, then the feature for metrics, and last, the feature for traces. And to observe, of course, we need to have metrics provided by those agents. So we will pay attention to the observability metrics that both agents is providing to us. Both agents has the similar design experience where we need to define receivers or input plugins in Fluent Bit, processors or filter and parser plugins in Fluent Bit, and exporters or output plugins in Fluent Bit. The collector pipeline is defined through a YAML structure file where we first list the plugins, so the receiver that we need, and we configure them. Same for the processors, same for the exporters, and also last for the same for the connector. It is actually in the service and the pipeline sections where we actually define the flow of our pipeline. In Fluent Bit, it used to rely on a specific structure file. So here is the structure where we have the type of the plugin, so input, filter, parser, and output, the name of the plugin that we're going to use, so it could be tail or HTTP, whatever, and then the property of the plugin. The flow of the Fluent Bit pipelines follow a specific structure. So we start with input, it goes to parser, then filter, and last output. Compared to the collector in Fluent Bit, you don't define the actual flow of your pipeline. The flow is built following the sequence that we define in the pipeline. So if you have a pipeline with one input and two parsers and several filters, it will do input, then go parser 1, parser 2, filter 1, filter 2, and so on. So Fluent D and Fluent Bit has relied on tags to route the data to the right plugins. Each plugin will start with match to specify which tags you want to use, or the patterns of tags that will be basically going through that plugins. This notion of a tag is really powerful because at the end you can define very complex pipelines just by a very short file. This notion of tag and routing doesn't exist really in the collector, and it has been translated through this notion of connector, and specifically the routing connector. Since Fluent Bit 2, there is a new format to design our pipeline that will be closer to the format that we use in the collector. So here is the new structure where you can see it's a YAML structure where you have an input, you list all the input plugins, and then you have a new information, which is processors, and last you can see we have the parser and the filter, and that's output. But more than the format, with this YAML format, Fluent Bit has introduced this notion of processors. Don't think that the processors are the same thing than the processors in the collector. the notion of processor is quite exciting because in Fluent Bit, you have 4 distinct threads, so input, filter, parsers, and output. And in the processor allow us to add a pre-filtering task directly in the input or output threads. So each processor will run its own thread, so much more efficient, much more faster, and so on. So for example, here is a pipeline where we are utilizing a processor. When it comes to logs, we may think that Fluent Bit would clearly have an advantage over the collector by looking at its reputation. What do you expect from an agent collecting logs? Of course, we need a couple of protocols supported, so UDP, TCP, syslogs, the ability to read log from a file, the support for the Fluent protocol, so-called Fluent Forward, and of course, the OpenTelemetry log format. From the receiver perspective, Collector and Fluent Bit has all the expected plugins to receive the logs from those protocols. When it comes to reading files, Fluent Bit will read files with the tail plugin and the Collector will do it with the file log receiver. Both has the options to include a folder path and exclude the file name. So the file log receiver of the Collector is the heritage of Stanza, so we'll bring the ability to filter, parse the content at the source. A bit similar to Fluent Bit with the new processor capability that has introduced with the Fluent 2.0. Otherwise, when it comes to OpenTelemetry and specific to the log format, Fluent Bit supports OTel, but only on the HTTP protocol without any compression. So it will require to disable the compression and also utilize OTel HTTP to send it to Fluent Bit. When it comes to add extra metadata, specifically the Communities one, both has the right plugin. So we have the Communities attribute processor in the Collector that will retrieve the fields you are interacting with the Communities API, and Fluent Bit will add an entire JSON stream with all the metadata, labels, annotations, and so on that we need. So then you will probably manipulate that JSON object utilizing nest lift to add those metadata into your logs. In terms of processing, the Fluent Bit provides many ways of parsing our logs with regex, with JSON, predefined parser. In the Collector, it is clearly possible to parse either at the source with the file log receiver or later using transform processor that provides many operators with the help of the OTel language, so OpenTelemetry Transformation Language. As of now, both solution is not providing a developer experience where we can easily debug, test our pipeline by looking at the results of each given steps of our pipeline. But by experience, it's easier to parse your logs with Fluent Bit. OTel is an amazing language, but for now, understanding issues related to a complex regex, for example, is a bit difficult. Even if we can process the same way on both agents, Fluent Bit would have a smaller advantage when it comes to parsing the logs. In terms of output, both agents are quite similar. Fluent Bit has the advantage to run a last-minute processing for a given output. Again, when it comes to exporting logs using OpenTelemetry protocol, Fluent Bit would be able to achieve that, but only support OpenTelemetry HTTP. So from an output perspective, both solutions are quite similar. Collector may have more exporter plugins available. So the Collector may have more exporter plugins available because at the end, lots of vendor has built their own exporters to send the data. But at the end, usually when you support OpenTelemetry, Prometheus, and few other protocols, you are almost compatible to 80% to most of the solutions of the market. For metric pipeline, we can clearly see the difference for now between both agents. The Collector has many receivers, all the processor required to reduce the cardinality, transform our metrics, adding or removing metadata and more. More important, the Collector supports metric conversion. So if we collect Prometheus, we have the options to convert it into Delta. And of course, it's also possible to do it in the opposite directions. One main difference with the Collector in Kubernetes environment is the target allocator, making the configuration of our pipeline much more easier and reducing significantly the resource usage of our collector. On the other hand, Fluent Bit has a couple of the metrics receiver collecting metrics from disks, any operating systems, Prometheus exporters, OpenTelemetry. Regarding the Prometheus input plugins, the configuration is limited. It is not allowing us to configure it with a scrap config that is in fact possible in the collector. But one of the biggest downsides of Fluent Bit is the fact that it is not able to filter, to modify the metrics collected, to enrich the metrics with extra metadata. And more important, it has no way of converting metrics. So if you collect Prometheus data, no way of translating into Delta. Of course, Fluent Bit has also a WASM support. Maybe we could extend the behavior of Fluent Bit on the metric signal, but I have not tried it yet. Fluent Bit has also EULA script parser, but as of now, it is only limited to the log signals. So for metrics, I would say Collector has a significant advantage. Fluent Bit is more like a sort of gateway or a proxy than a real agent that is able to parse and enrich the data that is going through that agent. Again, for when it comes to traces, Collector is clearly has an advantage because it's been designed to handle traces. In fact, it was the first signal support by the Collector. It was traces. We can receive, enrich, filter, and even manage our simple decisions with our Collector. For now, Fluent Bit will act similar to the metrics like a proxy or gateway where the traces will come in and then it will forward to one or several destinations. The biggest downside of traces with Fluent Bit is the fact that it only supports OpenTelemetry HTTP and it's not supporting the compressed format of traces. So you will need to modify your application before sending it to Fluent Bit. So disable compression and utilize the HTTP protocol instead. One important aspect when dealing with external agents like Fluent Bit and the Collector is the fact to be able to measure the health of the components. Remember, Fluent Bit, the Collector, or any other agents of the market will be responsible of collecting, sending data to our observability backend. If the agents die, yeah, you're blind. You cannot report the health. You cannot see the behavior of critical applications. You cannot receive alerts. You cannot look at your SLOs. Well, you completely blind, dark mode completely. So we need to treat our agents like our favorite workload. Of course, we need to report the resource usage of our agents, so the CPU, the memory in a specific containers environments. Of course, throttling, CPU throttling will be very important. If you're running Kubernetes environments, look at the Kubernetes events. It will make a lot of sense. The network usage, very important to figure out if we don't have any drop to the networks and more. But out of the resource behavior, we also need to understand the actual health of our pipelines. What is great with Fluent Bit and the OpenTelemetry Collector, they are both exposing Prometheus metrics about the behavior of the pipeline. For each solution, of course, this is an option, so we will have to enable it to get the data, and very easy to enable, by the way. And also, once enabled, you will be able to report the quantity of data received or in the input plugin in Fluent Bit, in bytes or on your records, the quantity of data processed, so parsed or filtered in case of Fluent Bit, the quantity of data exported, so the number of bytes or the number of records. We can look at the number of data exported that has been dropped or that was in failure. But I would say that I have a slight preference with the Collector because it reports one metrics per signals for input, processors, and exporters. So we'll have clearly understand if you have less metrics coming in or less metrics coming out, or the opposite, I want to just look at the logs or only the traces, and the Collector is providing that feature. In the processors, we can report the number of data accepted by the processors and the data that has been filtered or dropped by a processor. So that is also very important, specifically if you want to figure out if you are dropping data or you're filtering, to see if those filter works. By looking at those numbers, you will be able to validate your pipeline. So it is a bit easier to look at the flow of data going to one step of the pipeline to another with the collector. The other thing that I love about each solution is the ability to split by the name of the plugin. If you want to look at the number of data sent to Dynatrace versus Prometheus, you will be able to do so on both solutions. One advantage of the collector is that it is providing more insight on its behavior. It exports the number of IP miss. We can understand any network issues during potential restarts of our agents. It also adds details on the actual process with the size of the heap, the number of allocated bytes, so we can understand a bit more if there is any garbage collector running during the execution of the pipeline. Out of just reporting the health, the collector has the extension called zpage and pprof to get profiling data of the collector. Again, this is something that we won't do as an end user, but very useful for a maintainer perspective. That's it for today's episode related to the comparison between Fluent Bit and the OpenTelemetry Collector. In this episode, we focused mainly on sharing the design experience, the features supported for logs, metrics, and traces, and the observed data that both agent is able to expose. If you're looking for an episode looking at numbers on how each agent behaves in terms of resource usage, then be patient. I will produce soon an episode where I will share all the tests and benchmarks that I've done, be comparing Fluent Bit and the collector. And there is a lot of pipeline, there is a lot of things, so it doesn't fit in this episode. But again, if you don't take the resource usage in considerations, by just looking at the feature and how we were able to build the pipeline, I have, for example, only if you deal with logs, I would say Fluent Bit is a wonderful solution, and I think it has always been proved to many users that Fluent Bit is a great solution to process and transport logs. If you have to deal with other signals than just logs, so metrics and traces, then the collector is obviously the best options. Parsing, receiving metrics and parsing metrics is much more advanced with the collector. You can do more things. You can reduce cardinality, you can convert, there is so many things that you can do with the collector that you cannot do with the Fluent Bit. So the collector is clearly has a major advantage compared to the Fluent Bit agents. And as for the traces, of course, yeah, if you have to manipulate your traces, then the collector is clearly the best choice. So if you are dealing only with logs, yeah, Fluent Bit is, I think, great options. If you have to deal with many other signals, then of course, collector will be the best fit for your need. In terms of observability, data exposed by both agents, both provides the right KPI, but I would say that the collector has more insights on how your pipeline works, on how the actual process of the collector works with the heap and so on. So again, both provides us quite similar data, but I have a slight preference for the collector perspective. So if you're looking for the results of all the tests that I've executed and look at how the resources are behaving when you deal with logs and traces and metrics with Fluent Bit or with collector, then be patient. This episode will be released soon. So thanks for watching. And if you enjoy this content, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. So see you soon for the second episode where we will share the best perspective results. See you.